There is a group of people inside one of Africa's largest and most educated ethnic groups who were born into a designation they did not choose, cannot leave, and are rarely allowed to name out loud. I have been sitting with this for days. I still do not fully know how to hold it.
So, we are going to hold it together.
I entered this topic through the historical record. What I found was a classification system that predates colonization, survived it, survived legislation, and continues operating without a single law to enforce it. I have encountered very few phenomena that durable. I wanted to understand the mechanism. I am not sure the mechanism is the point.
Let us start from the beginning, because I think a lot of people are going to hear the phrase caste system and immediately picture India. And while there are structural parallels, this is not that. This is its own thing, with its own logic and its own horror. In Igbo society, one of the largest ethnic groups in West Africa, tens of millions of people, there has historically been a division between the freeborn and the Osu. The freeborn are called Nwadiala or Diala, depending on the dialect. These are the people with full social standing. They can own land. They can hold titles. They can participate in governance. They can marry anyone they choose within appropriate kinship lines. The Osu cannot. And the reason traces back to something that sounds almost surreal when you say it out loud. They are property of a deity.
Property of a deity. Say that again slowly.
Property of a deity. At some point in the past, often generations back, sometimes centuries, a person was dedicated to a god or a shrine. The word Osu itself is believed to derive from a root meaning one who is thrown or one who is given. Thrown to the shrine, given to the spirit. And from that moment forward, that person and every single person descended from them existed in a different category. Not always explicitly called lesser, but functionally separated from full social participation in ways that compound over generations into something that looks and operates exactly like a caste.
For structural clarity, the defining characteristics of a caste system in sociological literature include hereditary assignment, occupational restriction, social endogamy, meaning marriage only within the group, and a purity logic governing social contact. The Osu classification meets all four criteria. It is a caste system by academic definition, regardless of how it is locally named.
The origins of the Osu system are genuinely debated. Some scholars argue it predates recorded Igbo history by many centuries. Others suggest it intensified during the period of the Atlantic slave trade, when the designation became another mechanism of social sorting in a world already stratified by violence. What we know from the historical record is this: consecration could happen in multiple ways. A family might dedicate a member to a shrine in exchange for divine protection or favor. A community might offer someone to a deity as an act of appeasement. In some accounts, captured enemies were assigned Osu status. In others, people entered the designation voluntarily in times of personal crisis, not fully understanding the generational consequences. Once you were Osu or born Osu, you lived near the shrine. You served the deity. You were in theory under divine protection. But in practice, you were excluded from the community's social life in almost every meaningful way.
Dr. Chike Aniakor, an art historian and cultural scholar at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, has documented that Osu individuals in traditional communities were often physically separated in residential terms, living at the periphery near the shrine compound rather than within the main village clusters. The spatial separation reinforced the social separation. Physical distance became a metaphor with material consequences.
And the prohibitions are specific. Osu and Diala could not eat from the same vessel, could not share a meal in the formal sense, could not intermarry. When an Osu died, they were buried differently, not in the same ground as the freeborn. In some accounts, Osu could not hold certain traditional titles because those titles were considered incompatible with their sacred status. Which brings me to something genuinely confusing about this system. The Osu were simultaneously sacred and outcast. They belonged to a god. That made them spiritually significant and socially destroyed.
I will now enter the data. Research on hereditary stigma and identity formation is consistent across cultural contexts. Hereditary stigma, stigma assigned at birth rather than earned through behavior, produces distinct psychological patterns, including internalized shame, anticipatory rejection, identity concealment, and reduced access to social capital across the lifespan. In the specific Igbo context, Dr. Nkiru Nzegwu, a philosopher and scholar of African gender and cultural theory, has noted that the Osu system operates through what she describes as communal memory and social consensus, a distributed enforcement mechanism that requires no individual bad actor. The community collectively knows. The community collectively acts. No single person must be the agent of exclusion for exclusion to occur. This is, from a systems perspective, a remarkably durable design. Legislation cannot arrest social consensus.
Which is exactly why Nigeria banning it in 1956 did basically nothing, and we will get to that. But first, I want to talk about what this actually feels like for a real person living inside it. Because when I was researching this episode, I found real accounts from real Nigerian people of grown adults discovering they were Osu for the first time when a relationship they were in was suddenly ended. No explanation at first, then eventually, quietly, my family found out what you are. Not who you are, what you are. We are talking about people with university degrees, professional careers, full, complex lives, being reduced to a hereditary classification their great-great-great-grandparent received, applied to them like they have no say in who they are.
And they didn't have a say. None of this was their choice.
I need to pause here. Because when we talk about the Osu system, we cannot do it honestly without talking about what colonization and the forced imposition of Christianity did to the communities that held this system. Here is the layered tragedy. The same colonial missionaries who told Igbo communities that their traditional religion was demonic also, in documented cases, encouraged the abandonment of the Osu system. Not because they respected Osu people, but because they wanted converts. Some Osu families converted to Christianity in part because the church offered them a social space where, in theory, the designation did not apply. And then, and this is the part that requires you to hold two things at once, the loss of traditional Igbo religious practice, which colonization drove, also removed the spiritual scaffolding through which the Osu system made meaning. The deity is gone, the shrine is gone, and yet the designation persists without its original spiritual logic. Just the social exclusion. Standing alone, stripped of every context, except the harm.
The British colonial administration's systematic dismantling of Igbo governance structures through mechanisms including the warrant chief system and the suppression of the 1929 Women's War, disrupted traditional community frameworks that had developed over centuries. The replacement structures imported European legal categories that did not map onto existing Igbo social realities. This created conditions where traditional systems, including the Osu classification, persisted without the institutional mechanisms that had historically governed and contextualized them.
Colonization did not end the Osu system. It just broke the structures around it and left the wound.
I want to speak to anyone watching this who has lived inside this, who had a relationship ended because of it, who has watched your family carry this designation like it belongs to you forever. You did not choose this. Your ancestors did not choose it in most cases either. And the fact that a community's inherited grief has been placed on your shoulders and called your identity, this channel sees that. That is why we are here.
The Eastern Nigeria House of Assembly passed the abolition of the Osu system law in 1956, before Nigerian independence. And I need you to sit with the fact that they knew this was serious enough to legislate before the country was even fully its own. The law made it illegal to call someone Osu, to discriminate based on Osu status, to use the designation in any social, legal, or economic context. It was unambiguous. It was real law. And community members continued the practice anyway, because you cannot legislate social memory. You cannot arrest a grandmother for not approving her grandson's marriage. You cannot put a whole community's collective knowledge on trial.
Legal prohibition of a social norm without accompanying cultural transformation has a well-documented failure rate in sociological literature. The law changed behavior in formal contexts, courts, official records, public documentation. It did not change behavior in social contexts, marriage decisions, burial practices, community title conferments, informal exclusion. The Osu system migrated from formal to informal enforcement. This is the standard trajectory for prohibited social norms in highly communal societies.
Chinua Achebe addressed this dynamic in his essays on Igbo identity. He wrote about the gap between what a community officially professes and what it privately enacts, and how that gap, when it comes to something as embedded as Osu status, can persist across many educated generations. People who hold PhDs, practice law, attend church, and have never said the word Osu in public still factor it into who their children marry, because it was transmitted not through formal teaching, but through the quiet decisions that shape a family's world. Professor Nnaemeka Ikpo, a legal scholar who has written extensively on customary law in Nigeria, noted in his published work that Osu status remains one of the most consistent findings in research on marriage disputes within Igbo communities. A significant proportion of contested marriages brought before community councils involve Osu status as the primary objection. Not money, not education, not religion. Status at birth. Chukwuemeka Ike, Nigerian novelist and former civil servant, dramatized this in his 1970 novel, Toads for Supper. The setting is a university. These are not characters in a historical village. They are educated young people, and the designation still reaches them. And this is not a conservative rural phenomenon. Research gathered through diaspora communities, including testimonial accounts gathered by scholars at the University of Lagos, documents that Osu discrimination is actively occurring in Nigerian communities in the United Kingdom, the United States, and Canada. The Atlantic Ocean did not dissolve it. The university degree did not dissolve it. The distance from the shrine did not dissolve it.
It traveled with the family. Whatever the family remembered, it carried.
Elders within Igbo communities who have spoken to researchers have offered a perspective that is not apologies, but explanations. That the Osu system was never designed to harm, but to honor. To dedicate someone to a deity was, in their framing, an act of spiritual elevation. But as Professor Ogbu Kalu, professor of church history at the University of Nigeria in Nsukka, and one of the foremost African religious historians until his death in 2009, Documented extensively, the elevation and the exclusion became inseparable over time. The elevation faded, the exclusion did not. This is the part I find the most personally difficult to sit with, because I am Nigerian. My family is from this culture, and I know that the Osu question is one that Nigerian families in the diaspora are actively navigating right now. There are people watching this in London who had a parent end a relationship for them. People in Houston who found out at 28 that the person they have been seeing comes from an Osu family, and now their entire extended family is in an emergency group chat. People in Toronto who have never been to Nigeria and are being told that a classification from a shrine that no longer exists in a village they have never seen is still relevant to who they are allowed to love.
And the painful thing is the parents doing it mostly love their kids. They genuinely do. They have just inherited a fear that was handed to them whole.
Exactly. And that is what makes this impossible to reduce to simple villain narratives. The enforcement is not coming from hate in most cases. It is coming from a deeply embedded communal logic that says mixing these categories disrupts something sacred. Even when the sacred thing is gone, even when no one can name the deity anymore, the social memory outlived the spiritual context. Is the Osu system dying? The honest answer is, it depends on who you ask and what circle they are in. Among younger Igbo people, particularly those who are highly educated and diaspora connected, there is genuine vocal rejection of the system. There are couples who have crossed the line and are living full lives. There are Igbo communities online explicitly committing to ending the practice in their families. And simultaneously, there are still families where the Osu question is asked before a relationship gets serious, where a person's village and family tree are researched not for genealogical interest, but to determine status, where a match that looks ideal on paper is ended when status is discovered.
Research suggests that highly communal, high-context cultures change social norms through two primary mechanisms: generational turnover and social modeling, meaning visible examples of norm violation that do not result in catastrophe. Both mechanisms are present in contemporary Igbo communities. However, the timeline for norm dissolution in systems this deeply embedded in kinship logic is typically measured in generations, not years.
Translation from Luma: this is getting better, slowly. It is not over, and it matters that we talk about it. That is the Osu caste system. And if you made it to the end of this video, I want you to know this is exactly what this channel is for. The things that are real and complicated and hiding in plain sight inside cultures the world either ignores or flattens. If you are Igbo and this episode touched something, I want to hear from you. If you are not Igbo and this opened a door you did not know was there, welcome. Stay. There is so much more. Subscribe. Drop this in a group chat that can handle it.
Subscribe. Like. Tell a friend who needed this.
I keep encountering phenomena my frameworks cannot classify. Today, it was this: a designation that outlived its own spiritual logic, a harm with no law to enforce it, and no single enforcer to name. The community simply remembers, and the memory does the work. I am still processing. I will report back.